Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Book Zone from Wiltshire Council on behalf of Wiltshire Libraries. Nice to see you all. We're just going to wait a few minutes so we can be sure that people are on and that you can actually hear me. So if you can hear me clearly, if you could put something in the comments, just so I can we can make sure they're actually live and you can hear our dulcet tones. Good, good. It's looking like people can see and hear us. That's all to the good. Lovely. Well, welcome to the Book Zone from Wiltshire Libraries. I'm thrilled to bits to say we've got another author with us today. His name's Peter McLean, and he's the author of The War for the Rose Throne and the Burned Man trilogies. I'm going to bring him into the conversation in just a second so you can hear him read an extract from his latest novel, Priest of Lies. This recording does come with a warning in that the content will contain some offensive language. So if that's going to bother you, then you might want to hit the mute button or perhaps kind of tune into one of our other interviews. Pete's an absolute delight, but it's part and parcel of the books that he writes. So without further ado, I'm going to see if I can get hold of Pete on the line. Just 1 second. Hello, Pete. Can you hear me?
Hi, John. How you doing?
Lovely. Really nice to see you. Thank you for coming along this afternoon.
Yeah, you too. Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate
Excellent.
it.
So I'm just going to wait for a second. I'm just going to ask YouTube, can everyone hear Pete speaking? Whilst we're waiting for that, we had some technical difficulties with RJ Barker's interview last week, and he's very, very kindly said that he'll come and re-record the interview for us. So we will put that up. It won't be the same interview because I don't think you'd get. I think if we asked Peter, RJ the same questions, we wouldn't get the same answers. Lovely. Oh, that's excellent. That's what I wanted to hear. That the audience can hear you and see us very well.
Oh, okay.
So that's fantastic. So I'm just going to put you onto the main screen, Pete, and then if you'd like to read, just one moment. Right. Take it away, Pete.
Okay, so I'm going to read to you from Priest of Lies, which is the second book in the War for the Rose Throne. This is an extract taken from near the middle of the book. For those who've read Priest of Bones, this is again following our good friend Thomas Piety and the Lady Ailsa. They are currently in the capital city of Dansburg, where Thomas is being introduced to high society. And we begin. Court was worse than I could ever have imagined. To begin with, it wasn't so different to how our visit to Lanyetrov's house had been. There were heavily guarded gates to pass, then hordes of footmen outside the palace, and rows of parked carriages and an abundance of fuss and ceremony and wine. The hall we were shown into was probably one of the smaller ones, but it was still vast, easily twice the size of Lanyetrov's. I couldn't even imagine what the great grand hall used for state receptions must have looked like. Here, gilded chandeliers hung on long chains from an impossibly high ceiling, and musicians played everywhere, lute and pipe and fiddle, all blending together under the muted hubbub of 100 or more conversations. A herald was gradually admitting guests into a ballroom, announcing them in a loud voice as they passed, while the rest of us milled around with wine glasses in our hands. "Lord and Lady Lan Andronikov," he announced, ushering in a couple in early middle age. I saw Ailsa turn to watch them as they entered the ballroom. "Do you know them?" I asked her. "Of course I do," she murmured. "The lady is a personal friend of mine. Very fond of the poppy, I'm afraid. She starts to sweat after a few hours without a pipe, tremble after 6, and beg after 10. By the time we got to 14, I could have made her do absolutely anything. Her husband managed to avoid the war by taking a position on the governing council. He's a weakling and a coward, and he's said some extremely unwise things recently. But he's very, very rich." "Those things are good to know," I said, and Ailsa showed me a small smile. I was beginning to appreciate her skills and her knowledge more and more with each day that passed in Dansburg. I think that pleased her. "General Garin of the Queen's Own Cavalry," the herald proclaimed, admitting a pot-bellied man with 60 or so years to him. He was wearing a crimson coat and hugely bristling white side whiskers, and he swayed as he walked. What about him? Can't even get out of bed in the morning without a glass of brandy first, Ailsa said, keeping her voice too low to be overheard. It takes him 3 before breakfast to stop shaking. He gets through 2 bottles a day without fail. It was quite remarkable, I supposed, that we'd won the war at all with men like him in charge. I wondered how many plans had gone awry, how many attacks had failed, and how many men had died because that cunt was drunk. The Duke of Samarind and his paramour, Gydia of Alasai. She's only 10 years old, Ailsa said. And yes, he is bedding her. That made my stomach clench with revulsion, and I glared at the Duke of Samarind's velvet-cloaked back until he was out of sight. I wondered how it would feel to kill a duke, and if they died the same as lesser men. I remembered the man I had strangled back in Ellenberg in the winter, and I thought that they probably did. The Lord Lanyetrov. Well, you know him. It appears his wife is indisposed again. I wonder what she meant by that. But I put it down to some gossip I hadn't heard. Of course, I remembered him well enough, and his bare pit and his idea of how debt collection worked. I knew more than enough about him. Major Bakraloff of the Queen's Own Fifth. I smiled a little at that, and the memory of the gold crown I had won from him at Lanyetrov's bare bait. The thought of betting with gold still made my head spin a little, I had to admit, but it seemed that was how things were done in the moneyed circles of Dansburg high society. The Major had seemed like a decent fellow, at least, and among this company that was quite some achievement. The Lord Chief Justiciar, Dieter Vogel. Oh, he's very dangerous, Ailsa said, dropping her voice so low I could barely hear her for all that her head was almost on my shoulder. I'll introduce you later, but you've to show him the utmost respect. Why is that, then? Officially, he's the Lord Chief Justiciar, she whispered, her lips so close to my ear that I could feel the warm flutter of her breath against my skin. Unofficially, he's also the Provost Marshal of the Queen's Men. He's my boss. I nodded an understanding. Everyone answers to someone, after all, even a Queen's man. Eventually it was our turn, and a footman ushered us through those still waiting until we were in front of the herald. The Lady Ailsa and Mr. Thomas Piety, he asked us, glancing down at the papers in his hand. Father Thomas, I corrected him, thinking of what Ailsa had said to me a few days before about how being a priest was a respectable occupation. I'm a priest. The herald consulted his papers again and sniffed. A military priest, Mr. Piety, he said. You have attended no seminary that the Crown is aware of, nor have you in all likelihood actually been ordained. Even the professional classes have their standards, after all. I started, but he interrupted me to introduce us to the ballroom. The Lady Ailsa and Mr. Thomas Piety, he proclaimed. I resisted the urge to stab him, but only just. Ailsa pulled me through the doorway and away from the herald, and I saw the ballroom in all its splendour. Massive gilded mirrors on every wall, reflecting back the light of the chandeliers and making the already huge room look 10 times the size it was. The floor was marble and it gleamed with polish, slippery underfoot. Footmen circulated everywhere in their bright red royal livery, with the white rose sewn over their hearts, with silver trays in their hands bearing glasses of wine and plates of strange delicacies. What even is this? I asked Ailsa, as I chewed a thin piece of bread with some sort of salty black stuff on it. Fish eggs, Ailsa said. I almost spat it out on the floor in front of me. Is it possible to get a brandy? This is the royal palace, Ailsa smiled. It's possible to get absolutely anything here. She caught a footman's eye and exchanged a few words with him. And less than a minute later I was drinking the best brandy I'd ever tasted in my life. We circulated. Or, truth be told, Ailsa did. I followed her around, exchanging empty words with people I didn't know and didn't care to know, but that was no more than I'd been expecting. I managed a brief conversation with Major Bakraloff, at least, which lifted my spirits somewhat. He really wasn't a bad fellow at all. It was well enough until I found myself face to face with Lord Llanyetrov. Ah, the provincial priest, he said, and the look on his face was a sneer by anyone's definition. Who in the God's name's let you in? Oi, that's me, I said, making no attempt to hide the Ellenberg in my accent. You're the man who likes to set bears on people. Oh, I do declare we have offended the good priest's holy sensibilities. He laughed far too loudly for my liking. You've offended my fucking human sensibilities, I said, and I leaned close enough that I knew no one else could have heard us. You, my lord, are a cunt. Llanyetrov took a step backward then, and he glared at me, but I saw him checking to make sure for himself that we couldn't have been overheard. I should see you in the dueling circle for that, piety, he snarled. Oh, that would be my greatest pleasure, I said. I was at war for 3 long years. I was at Messier and at Avignon, and I came home to tell of it. I've killed more men than you've ever fucking met, you prick. He paled slightly and turned away. No one had heard us, so we had no obligation to protect his honour. I knew that, and in truth I was glad of it. I could almost certainly have killed this arsehole in a duel, but what would that have proved? That I was a violent thug from Ellenberg, that was all. And that was the very thing Ailsa had been working so hard to play down. No, I wouldn't be duelling in public with Llanyetrov, or anyone else for that matter, not if I could help it. There was simply no point. So long as Llanyetrov knew the lay of things and who was boss, that was enough to my mind. That was how I did business, in Dansburg or anywhere else. There you go.
Wow, fantastic. Very, very good. Let's just pull us back to the 2 shot.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, bear with me. I'm just going to do that so everybody can see you. What it really reminds me of is that when you read Priest of Bones, that Thomas Piety, Priest of Bones, is that Thomas Piety is a gangster in his own turf. But in Priest of Lies, you've really thrown him in the deep end, haven't you? You've really put him in an uncomfortable situation. This is kind of like high society meets The Godfather.
Yeah, exactly that. I wanted to do a kind of fish out of water thing, because Thomas, as you say, is the boss in his hometown, and he survives on his reputation more than anything else. So that we take him to the capital city and throw him into a situation where he hasn't got a reputation because nobody's heard of him, and see how he fares from there. There's a lot of fun.
It's really good, because often in a trilogy, a book 2 can be the kind of the slump, but by putting him in a new situation, you've kind of rebooted it. It's almost like a parallel novel rather than, I mean, I know there's a logical progression from one to the other, but you've kind of given it a completely new take on it.
Yeah, that was definitely the idea, and I have never actually said it's.
Oh,
a
have you
trilogy,
not? Oh, does that mean we might?
I have never. People keep accusing me of being a trilogist. I have never said this is a trilogy.
How many books do you think we might have?
I'm not sure I can say any more on that just at the moment, but yes, I have never said it's a trilogy.
So I'm guessing hints of more than 3 then in that case. So
I couldn't possibly.
Douglas Adams always wrote trilogies that had 4 or 5 books in them. So
4 or 5 books in them, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's going to get all the gossip mongers on Twitter going wild as to how many books are going to be. So excellent. I had a question I was going to ask you, but I kind of came back to the kind of Godfather references. But yeah, so let's go with that. Is that both of your lead characters, both Don in the Don Drake series and Thomas Piety as kind of self-made men. Is that due in any way to your own background, or is it just something that appeals to you as a School of Hard Knocks?
Yeah. It is. I was going to say, I think Don Drake's more of a self-unmade man than anything else.
Path of destruction. So.
Yeah, exactly. One of the most self-destructive characters I've ever written. But yeah, I've just always really been a fan of gangster stories. As, you know, the Godfather and Scarface and all that kind of stuff. And I always remember the opening line of Goodfellas. You know, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster, and that's just so cool. I'm a big crime fiction fan.
I don't know if you
probably
I was
read.
going to say, if you heard RJ, that he's a crime fiction fan, but not the gangster one so much as the kind of the investigation and the Agatha Christie, and it comes through quite strongly.
Yeah,
So it's really interesting. That's not by design that we've got two kind of crime fantasy authors, kind of consecutive weeks. But yeah, they're really really interesting. So.
yeah, I've always liked that. When I grew up reading, I probably shouldn't have done, but I grew up reading Mickey Spillane and Mario Puzo and all that kind of stuff. I probably read as much crime and spy fiction as I do fantasy. If
It
not more,
comes through in the fiction. It really is kind of like a Mickey Spillane kind of hard-boiled kind of way of writing, and I think it's a really good kind of style that people can very easily kind of lock onto. Oh, that's what this is, which I think helps an audience if it's a new world they're not familiar with to say, oh, it's this kind of world and get settled in quite quickly. So.
Yeah, I mean that's what I like in the kind of fantasy that I like to read, is to be able to hit the ground running and just go with it rather than having to figure out what all these things with strange names actually are and how it all works, kind of thing. I think it's probably cleverer writing to do that sort of thing in a completely alien world, but I must admit I don't find it as enjoyable to read.
Not sure.
Personally.
I think there's a talent in making things acceptable and easy to understand for the audience. I know RJ was talking about kind of Warhammer 40,000. I know that's something you write for as well, but one of the things he was saying was that Warhammer 40,000 and 2000 AD make it easy for their readers to kind of quite quickly work out what kind of novel that they're reading, and I think there's an art to that. So.
Yeah, no, I mean the Warhammer universe. I mean, it's been going on over 30 years, and it's an incredibly developed setting and established lore and everything.
So I was going to say we should probably explain to those of you who don't know, Warhammer is a set of war games, but they've actually been very, very successful in publishing quite a lot of novels with some really well-known authors that have written for them, of which Peter's one of them. How many novels have you written for?
Oh, I don't actually do novels for them. I do short stories for them, and I've got an audio drama in production. Well, I say it's in production. It can't be in production because they won't be allowed access in the studio at the minute. But I have written an audio drama for them that will be made at some point. Yeah, that was a real new experience. I've never done a script before. But no, I haven't written novels for them. Yeah, I think I enjoy doing the short stories, but I think novel writing time is limited, and I want to spend it writing my own stuff. Really.
I've got a question for you, and again, I don't know if you're allowed to answer this one, but I'm going to go and grab hold of it. The Don Drake series. It was 3 novels that got published it's about a hitman, but it's a hitman who uses magic, which I thought was a really unusual take on it. Did you want to talk about the background to it, where that idea came from?
Where that came from? I'm a really big fan of a comic book called Hellblazer. That was, I don't think it's still going. It used to be really, really big in the 90s. It's written by Jamie Delano, and Garth Ennis took over. I'm a big fan of his stuff as well. And he's not a hitman. He's a guy called John Constantine, but he is a very sort of down-at-heel, sleazy South London magician. And I kind of thought, I wanted to do something along those lines, but to turn it upside down on its head. I mean, Constantine isn't a particularly nice guy, but he's not an out-and-out villain like Don Drake is. I mean, Don is basically just a murderer who sets demons on people for money. He's not a nice guy. He was never supposed to be a nice guy. And you probably noticed those are the sort of characters
I can see similarity there going across the two trilogies. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Anna Smith Sparks' Empires of Dust, and I think I told her that you could subtitle it "Young Sauron Goes on a Heroin Bender" and pretty much not be too far away from the truth.
I know you've said she's at the dark end of grimdark, so.
Oh, it is pitch black stuff, but it's brilliant, and they're so beautifully written.
Not read any of hers yet, so.
And and I like Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire as well, with Jorg Ankrath, who's pretty much Alex from A Clockwork Orange with a sword.
I think Mark Lawrence is quite popular in Wiltshire Libraries. I think we've got copies of his books across the library servers, and very, very popular.
Great.
So, wow. So the question I don't know if you're allowed to answer for me is, will there be a book 4? Because when poor Don Drake's at the end of the novel, is quite a cliffhanger, isn't there?
Oh yes, there is. There was supposed to be a book 4 and a book 5, but it didn't really work out, unfortunately, with my publisher changing hands at the time.
So there's no chance that the fans are going to get to hear the end of the story?
I think it's slim, unless any of the publishers out there that may or may not be listening fancy picking it up.
If there's anybody watching, I can't see. If there's anybody watching there who'd like to see the end of the Don Drake series, you've heard it here from the boss. So, but
yeah, a bit of a long shot, I would have thought.
Never know. You can always self-publish, I suppose. So I know that.
I
know there's been some quite well-known authors.
That looks like a lot of work. Self-publishing really does look like a lot.
But if you've already got the kind of the audience and the fan base for it, it's not like you'd be doing the promotion work for it. So, and I know there have been some kind of conventional authors who've decided to keep their kind of publishing contract and have gone self-published for just different kind of projects that they couldn't get an audience for, or just chose that they wanted to keep control over it. So.
Definitely. No, I think it's something more and more people are doing these days, definitely.
Oh, sorry. We've got people from Bolton, and people can hear you nice and loudly. So, yeah, that's lovely. And, okay. So, I wanted to ask you a question about... I know from having read and listened to other interviews you've got that you're not a fan of high fantasy or unrealistic kind of adventures where someone gets their leg broken and then the next scene they're running around on a magically mended leg. So no, so I knew that. No. So my question to you was there a plan to show a different kind of magic in the Priest of Bones and Priest of Lies, the Rose Throne series?
Oh, definitely. I know we've talked about this before, but magic with no consequences gets old really, really quick. And you never sort of feel there are stakes under those kind of cases. So no, I don't like healing potions and Dungeons and Dragons type cleric casts heal light wounds and you haven't been stabbed by a sword anymore, because I believe in. It's stupid to talk about realism in a fantasy novel, I suppose, but
no,
things that would happen still happening. So if you get stabbed in the guts and I was going to say don't have a surgeon. Even if you do have a surgeon, you're probably going to die horribly of it. Yeah. Tomorrow, this kind of thing. If you have a wound that isn't mortal but isn't cleaned and looked after, you're going to get gangrene. That's the kind of stuff I like. And I think with the magic, especially in the Bones series with Billy the Boy, I'm trying to throw any spoilers in from the book I'm writing. Watch what I say. But yeah, with Billy the Boy, I mean, he's a creepy little bastard. He really is. And that's something I wanted. I want magic to feel unnatural. You certainly do that. And Billy the Boy is one of the characters in Thomas's crew, isn't he? And without giving lots away, he's probably the creepiest wizard you're ever likely to meet. So did he evolve, or had you designed him like that from the very beginning? Oh, he just appeared. He really did. He just appeared. My characters do. I thought there's something wrong with me in the brain. I'm sure there is. These people will just appear in my head, and I woke up and I've got this terrifying 12-year-old kid that can set things on fire, and I'm like, I like you. And I've read far too much Stephen King when I was young. Okay, that explains a lot, the Stephen King kind of coming through your work. So, but there is that kind of element of darkness, but also it's difficult to talk about Billy without giving too much away. You do show in book 2, you do show a more human side to him, don't you? So, yeah, to an extent. He's really it's very difficult because I don't want to spoil it for people, but also you don't want to spoil it because you know everything about the world, so as much as you've written. So exactly. So I've always been a fan of the creepy child as a trope in fiction. You can't go wrong with creepy kids. Give people nightmares. Definitely. I was going to ask you, there was a question on the forum about lost classics, about the kind of books that nobody's talking about anymore, but you kind of think deserves a wider audience. Is there anything like that, either stuff that's inspired you or stuff that you just really entertained you, but you think actually no one's reading at the moment? Yes, there is. There's a book I will never stop recommending to people because I think literally dozens of people bought it when it came out. But it's called The Singular and Extraordinary Tale of Mirror and Goliath. And it's by a lady called Ishbel B. It's published by Angry Robot Books. It's got one of the most gorgeous covers I've ever seen. And I don't know, it's just nobody seems to have read it. It's completely bananas. It's very high Gothic Victoriana, come surrealism. It has to
Okay.
be experienced. It really does. Probably won't be for everyone, but I thought it was
Oh,
absolutely
brilliant!
wonderful.
Well, if you can send me the link, we'll try and get that in the comments for the video afterwards, so
Yeah,
people can
I will
check
do.
that
I
out.
will
So,
definitely.
but sometimes people just seem to stick on the main kind of more popular authors and don't. And there's some absolutely classics out there, classic authors out there that
Oh,
aren't
there's
getting read. So,
complete gems.
um,
Yeah, yeah, they really are. I mean, the tagline on the back of the book is "My name is Jonathan Loveheart, and I wasn't born wicked."
ooh,
And I thought, oh, I've got
oh
to read this.
wow!
It's
And yeah,
great.
even within the famous authors, there's a Michael Moorcock. Before he went on doing kind of high sorcery, he wrote a wonderfully baroque Gothic novel called Golden Barge. And it's just about a young boy who decides, he wakes up one morning, decides he doesn't have a navel, he doesn't have a belly button, and he goes on a quest to try and discover why. And it reads like some sort of parable
Okay,
meets Titus Grown, the Gormenghast series. It's really
okay, yeah.
unusual, and it just shows the way the author could have gone if he hadn't got picked up by, was it Astounding Stories and all the kind of the pulps that he used to
Oh, I
write.
think
So,
so. Yeah,
um, oh, some.
yeah.
Oh
I've
yeah,
not
no,
even heard
that's
of
an
that one.
absolute cracker. But it was written in the
Okay.
dawn of it, in his very early career before he started doing all the kind of the pulp, kind of epic hero things. And
Mm,
it's yeah, it's very unusual. But yeah, it's got a lot in common with Mervyn Peake, the Titus Grown series, which
okay.
I think they made television film out of that, didn't they? But it's really kind of fallen off everyone's radar.
Yeah, yeah. The BBC did Gormenghast back in the '90s, I think. Yeah, I don't know how well it'll have aged, but I mean the books are
Books are wonderful,
fantastic.
but they're not like any. There are certain authors you read that you just think, actually, this has got bears no resemblance to anything I've read before or since. And I think Mervyn
No,
Peake's imagination was
no,
that
no.
vast that you couldn't quite imagine how he'd invented it all. I know he was born in Shanghai, and so I think some of the kind of the walled cities came from that. But yeah, so how did you get into writing in the first place, Pete? What kind of the muse threw you out of its back door of its taxi
Oh,
and left you to it, or
yeah. I've kind of been doing it on and off since I was in school, to be honest with you. Used to, I think English was one of the few subjects at school I actually liked for one thing. Probably had a lot to do with it. But yeah, I've been writing for my own entertainment since I was 15, 16 or so, I think. I mean, I left school, I got a job, I left home, I got married young, blah, blah, blah. It all kind of went out of the window for 20 years, but I picked it up again properly, and I suppose I was about 35 maybe when I started writing properly. I mean, like most people, I've got 3 unpublished and unpublishable novels sitting in a corner of my hard drive that I wrote before The Burn Man came out that will never see the light
that's
of
come up
day.
in
But
lots of interviews I've read that
um,
people have these drawers full of unpublished novels, and that maybe it takes. I think the novelist
oh,
James Bennett
definitely.
said that you kind of had to write 3 or 4 before you've maybe. I mean, that there's exceptions to that. There are people who've just written, their first novel is their, amazing work and gone on to it. But there's been quite a lot of authors have said that they've had to write 3 before they then get the one that gets published. So
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's quite common. I think you learn to write by writing. So I mean, unless you uh, are a natural genius or may perhaps be being economical with the facts, then I think most authors probably have at least
yeah,
something they wrote before they were published. Yeah, we may not be complete
whether it's
books, but
deliberate or not, I think sometimes when authors are interviewed, they forget about the books, or they just make it sound easy, and they kind of. I don't think they're lying necessarily. But
want to
they
forget
just kind of
about
like
them.
forget about them and just think, oh no, please don't remind me about that. So,
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
just going to have a look and see if
Yeah.
I've got any questions from the audience. If you've got any questions, if you'd like to put them in the comments, because we are actually live, and I'll see if we can ask them to Pete. And whilst we're waiting for people to type, because I know there's a delay on that, I just wanted to. We were chatting about kind of classics, but who would you say at the moment are the really exciting fantasy authors that people might not know about, and you really think, oh, you've got to read this person? They're just amazing.
Oh, well, Anna Smith Spark, I've already said, is
Yeah.
absolutely phenomenal. Ed McDonald's very good with the Raven's Mark series. Big fan of those. I've got too many I get sent so many brilliant books. Ed Cox had a good
Oh,
one
okay.
out recently. It's called Song of the Sycamore. It's a standalone sort of sci-fi fantasy hybrid. It's
Oh
really
wow.
cool. I enjoyed
Okay,
that a
I'll have a
lot.
look for that.
Uh, what else have I read recently? I haven't heard anybody talking about this one much. Owen Colfer, who did
Yep.
Artemis
The
Fowl,
children's.
the
Yep.
for kids' books and movies and all that. He's written his first adult modern day
Oh
set
wow,
fantasy called High Fire, and it's poor Cajun life and crime in the bayou with a dragon.
that sounds like a natural bedfellow for something you'd write.
I
So
kid you not. It's as bananas as it sounds, and it's
Owen
really, really
Colfer's
fun. I enjoyed that
an
an awful
enormously
lot.
talented writer, so I'll definitely check that out. Oh, that's fantastic, Pete. I've got a question.
Yeah, that's
I've got a
fun.
question that's come in from Jason Jamin, and it says, Peter, please can you tell us what's in the works for after the War for the Rose Throne?
Oh, now there's a question. I can tell you provisionally what I'd like there to be in the works for after the Rose Throne, because there's not under contract yet at all. But I'm writing, or well, I'm not because I'm writing War for the Rose Throne, but I've got some notes, outlines, and the first chapter or so of another secondary world fantasy. Different to all my other stuff, it's written in limited third, so you've got 3 different point of view characters, one of whom is a battle-weary, old, retired, very, very grumpy war nun. So I think I'm going to have a lot of fun writing that. I hope I can convince my editor that it'll be a lot of fun to buy as well, but we'll see.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. Oh, that sounds like an awful lot of fun. So, nuns and sisters, there seems to be, themes going through your work. So,
Nuns are terrifying, man. Seriously. If you ever met anybody that's been to Catholic school, they will be scared of nuns.
Okay, yeah, all right. Is that you? Did you go to Catholic school?
No, not me. I used to work for a guy. I used to work at EDS, and I worked for an Italian guy called Victor Feo, who was this honking great, big-built, shaved-headed former boxer that we used to think was a gangster, and he went to Catholic school, and he did not do nuns. They frightened the life out of him.
Oh yeah, I can believe that. Because they've got all the kind of the power behind them as well, haven't they? It's just and actually, now you're saying that, it's reminded me awfully of Ailsa, who's probably one of the most terrifying characters in fiction, and she's married to your protagonist. But she's enormously powerful, and you're just kind of thinking, oh my god, how is he managing to step around her? Well, we can't say how he does it towards the end, but yeah, as the relationship develops between the two of them, there's this real kind of spark where there's things that she's made him promise, so he can't tell his own crew what's going on, and that split loyalty is really interesting.
Yes, indeed. I was a bit when I was writing the end of Priest of Bones, and Thomas is standing at the altar. As I was writing it, I actually sketched on my notepad, "You poor bastard."
You are definitely of the theory of kind of get your hero and throw him into as much trouble as possible, and then work out how you're going to get him out of it. So,
absolutely that. Yeah, they don't want to have an easy life.
Oh god, no. We've got another question just come in. What's your writing process, Pete? Is it planning, or do you just write it as it comes?
Bit of both. So I do a plan at a fairly high level, so I always know where I'm going. I will always have written the end of the book before I write start, to be honest with you. So I have to know where I'm going, and I'll do sort of high-level beats, plot points as we go along a timeline, and kind of make up how you get from one to the other while I'm writing it, by and large. And if I think of something cool that I didn't think of while I was outlining it, I'll change the outline. That looks like all that foreshadowing was really clever. Then
I don't think a lot of people do say that the first draft is for you, the writer, and then as soon as you get the second one, you kind of say you can make it look like you knew what you were talking about right from the get go. So
exactly that.
Interesting. So are you a morning writer, evening writer, or just whenever the mood takes you?
Oh Lord, no. I am basically nocturnal. I think if I didn't have a day job, I would probably be nocturnal. No, I think I finished work at midnight last night, and that's because I had to go to work this morning. Yeah. I wrote when I left Hewlett Packard. I wrote full time for 18 months, and then I would drive my wife up the wall. I'd still be in the office at 3 a.m. You know I mean?
Is that just because the story was pouring out of you?
Absolutely that. But if I sit down, I can sit down at like 9 o'clock in the morning and edit, no problem. Sit down at 9 o'clock in the morning and try and write. Nah. It's just not going to happen. It really is. I have no idea why. But
just find what it works. But I think I've
Yeah.
listened to and read interviews with writers, and they all have different answers for how they do it. Stephen King does it like it's a day job, 9 till 1, and then answers letters and then goes for a walk in the afternoon. And other ones just pretend they're daydreaming all day and then write in the evenings and things like that. So it's just horses for courses, really, isn't it? So, but
I think if you ask 100 different writers how to do anything, you'll get 100 different answers. Yeah, I really do. Everyone's very different. I think in any creative field, I think everyone's very different in how they go about whatever it is that they do. You know.
So, yeah, I know my cousin's an artist, and he kind of does the coffee fueled late nights till 4 o'clock in the morning, and other people will just do it kind of in a really kind of more regulated manner. So, but so I'm just checking, make sure have we got any other questions, but I don't think we have. Well, I'll just go through my list just to make sure. I mean, I really enjoy listening to you talk about your book, because I've always imagined them with Scottish accents. I think because you knew that kind of, is it Dansburg was Edinburgh? You say your notes. So to hear you with the kind of Ellenburg.
Ellenburg is Edinburgh. Yeah. Now I'm gonna have to make an admission here. Okay, I can do a passable Northern. Can I do Scottish now? Not one little bit. So, although Ellenburg is geographically based on Edinburgh, it's location-wise, it seems to be somewhere around Huddersfield.
And I got that, but it just surprised me when you started speaking. I was thinking, oh, this wasn't how I was expecting you to speak. So.
No, I can't do Scottish to save my life. So the first reading I ever did, they adopted a Northern accent. And I was like, well.
And your wife's Scottish, so she'd probably kill you if you murdered the
Oh,
Scottish
absolutely, yes. No, my wife's actually from Edinburgh, so yes, if I attempted it and cocked it up, I don't know.
My wife's from Paisley, so I think she'd probably murder me if I attempted to butcher the Glaswegian accent. So, but
oh, definitely.
Oh, I've got another question. When can we get another tie-in story? Was there a tie-in story that came out recently?
Do we mean for Warhammer or Rose Throne? Warhammer, probably not anytime soon, because I'm busy. Rose Throne, I don't know. So there have been 2 spin-off Rose Throne short stories, both published in Grimdark magazine. So there was a Billy the Boy origin story in issue, I should know this and don't, either 13 or 18, I can't remember, called Hunger and the Lady. And one came out very recently, it was in the latest edition, which is a standalone Bloody Anne short story called The Blade's Edge. So that's what Anne did while Thomas was in Dansburg.
Fantastic. I should have to try. Is that an electronic magazine or a hard copy magazine?
It's an electronic.
Oh, okay.
You can get it on Amazon.
I'll have to look that one out. I'd like both stories. Look, sound really, really good.
Okay, great stuff. When can we get another one to answer the question? When Adrian wants one, I guess.
Oh, they've clarified. They said for the Rose Throne. So, but yeah, so. That's what obviously people are really enjoying. So,
yeah, the tie-in stories are fun to do. I don't know if you know, Mark Lawrence did a originally self-published collection of short stories called Road Brothers, which he go in his Prince of Thorns. Jorg Ankreth leads the Road Brothers, who are highwaymen and thugs, basically. And Mark wrote a spin-off story for each of the members of Jorg's crew. And he originally self-published that, and then I think his main publisher picked it up. I've got half a fancy to collect the shorts into something like that and do one for everyone, but that'll be as and when one day kind of thing, I think. But it'll be a lot of
That's a teaser and a half. That'll whet the appetites of everybody out there. I'd certainly want to go and buy a copy of it. So, but brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I'm just checking. I don't think we've got any more questions today. If you've got more questions, the best place to find you, Pete, is on Twitter.
It's definitely on Twitter. I live on Twitter. I'm at PeteMC666.
Thank you, and no prizes for guessing what that is. So it's been an absolute delight to talk to you today, Pete. Thank you so much for sparing your valuable writing time to come and chat to us here at Wiltshire Libraries. We're going to have, I can announce today that we've got, next week we've got Jen Williams has kindly agreed to come on the show. So if you've got any questions for her, have a think about those and send those in beforehand. But meanwhile, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Pete for coming along today and chatting to us and giving us an insight into the stories. And if you haven't already read them, thoroughly recommend them.
Yeah, very welcome, John.
My
Thank you for
pleasure.
having me on.
Okay.
Much
All
appreciated.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.